Good evening, and welcome to this panel discussion to learn about reducing Portland's carbon footprint. My name is Linda Mantell. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Portland, and I will be moderating this evening's panel. This program is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Portland. The League works to protect democracy and help to preserve and promote our rights to participate in government through voting and through understanding and speaking out on issues that affect our communities. This program is being recorded by Metro East Community Media for rebroadcast and will be available soon for online viewing at the League of Women Voters of Portland website, lwvpdx.org. Our program is supported by a grant from the Multnomah Bar Foundation, and we are grateful for their support, the support of Multnomah County, which provides this space for us, and the generosity of our speakers and volunteers in bringing you this program. Tonight's topic addresses a global problem that is being confronted aggressively at local, state, and regional levels, especially well here on the West Coast. The effects of climate change have become harder to ignore, and we feel an increasing sense of urgency to reduce greenhouse gases, which are a crucial contributor to climate change. Our speakers tonight bring different perspectives to the topic of reducing Portland's carbon footprint. Each speaker will have about 12 minutes to share her perspective and her organization's strategies for helping to reduce our carbon footprint. After all three have spoken, they will have a chance to ask each other questions. And I may have some additional questions to ask. And I will also ask that if you have a question you would like to have our panelists respond to, just raise your hand, someone will bring you a card, and we will take those questions from the audience later on. We encourage you to do that. Our first speaker is Michelle Krim. Michelle is Climate Action Programs and Policy Manager for the City of Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, its most recent name. She has expertise in the areas of climate action, pollution prevention, environmental management systems, and resource conservation. She is responsible for the development, update, and implementation of the City of Portland's award-winning Climate Action Plan, something that we should all become familiar with, as well as for tracking and reporting on the implementation of local carbon reduction efforts. She determines priority actions that are needed to build resiliency into government operations, as called for in Portland's climate change preparation strategy. She works to integrate equity into all aspects of the city's climate programs and policies to help ensure all Portlanders have access to the opportunities necessary to satisfy their essential needs, advance their well-being, and achieve their full potential. Michelle has a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Geology and Technology from the University of North Dakota and a Master of Science in Environmental Science from Washington State University. Michelle will give us an overview of what goes into making our carbon footprint and how the City of Portland is working to make our footprint smaller. Michelle.
Great, thank you so much. So thank you for inviting me to come here and speak with you today, and thanks for that great introduction. And I think this is a great setup because both government, businesses, individuals, nonprofits, advocates like 350 PDX, we all have really important roles to play in order to address this really challenging problem. And so I want to just take a little bit of time and share with you some of the things that are happening at a city and county government level. So the City of Portland was actually the first city in the United States to adopt a climate action plan. That was in 1993. You can see it pictured there on the left. And since then, we have updated our climate plan several times. Most recently, the plan that we're working today to implement was adopted in 2015. And this is a city and county joint plan, and it outlines all of the actions that city and county government are going to be taking between 2015 and 2020. So it's really our roadmap for what we need to be working on today. And then we update the plan again in 2020 to identify the next set of actions we need to take. Since that time in 1990, we've made a lot of progress. And so this graph here shows 1990 is on the left-hand side going across to 2014. You can see the blue line there is the carbon emissions trend, the national climate emissions trend, and you can see on a national level, carbon emissions are up 8%. above 1990 levels. But here in Multnomah County, we've been able to reduce total carbon emissions by 21%, which is a pretty significant accomplishment. And you can see that we've been able to create a pretty significant divergence from that national trend. This graph here has similar information, but during that same time, our population grew by 33%, which is the top blue line, and our jobs grew, which is that top green line. So on a per person basis and a per job basis, we've been able to achieve really significant carbon emission reductions. For example, on a per person basis, we've reduced emissions 41% since 1990. So again, a really dramatic accomplishment and something we should be really proud of, and is something that we spend a lot of time talking with other cities around the U.S. as well as around the world to help them identify ways that they can achieve similar accomplishments. But that's not the full story. This is the full story. This is where we're headed. So this takes that graph and expands it out to 2050. And so you can see our long-term goal is to reduce carbon emissions 80% by 2050. So we have a long, hard road ahead of us. And while we're on a good trajectory, it's going to get harder and harder and harder for us to achieve those emission reductions. And so we use our climate plans as a way to help us make sure that we're staying on track and to identify those big things that we need to be tackling next in order to keep that downward pressure going. So the climate action plan that we have in place now, it has over 170 actions in it. And again, these are actions that city and county government are taking. It's not actions that we need businesses and residents and others to be taking. So there's a whole other suite of work that needs to happen at those levels. Of those actions, a majority of them are on track, which means that they should be completed or significantly underway by the end of 2020. We also have some actions that we've completed, and then a handful of actions that either we haven't started yet or that are started but are facing some obstacles or challenges. And so that gives you a sense of our progress on a larger scale. What I wanted to spend my next just few minutes that I have with you doing is just giving you a few highlights of what these actions sort of look like and the accomplishments that we've been able to achieve. We tend to focus, a majority of the carbon emissions here locally comes from the energy that we use in our buildings, both our homes as well as our businesses and industrial buildings, and then from transportation. So how we move goods and people around the city. So the gasoline and the diesel fuel that we use. Those are the primary sources of local carbon emissions that we spend a lot of time focusing on. But there are a lot of other important areas that we focus on as well, including things like food and engagement, natural resources, et cetera. So I'm going to share a few examples of some of those accomplishments with you. So one thing that we've done is we have a requirement in place that commercial buildings, so buildings that look like this, that are 20,000 square feet or bigger, have to track and report their energy performance. And this enables them to compare how they're doing to other buildings that are similar to them. And it provides opportunities for these building managers to identify ways to improve efficiency and reduce the carbon emissions associated with these buildings. We also adopted a new requirement that just went into place in January that requires when someone sells a home in Portland, it has to have an energy score associated with it. So it's sort of like a miles per gallon sticker for a car, but instead it's for a home. And it enables prospective buyers to understand how that home performs from an energy perspective, which would let them know what sorts of energy efficiency improvements have been made and what it might cost them in terms of utility bills to operate that home. So it informs the buyer about that aspect of the home purchase. We also changed some zoning code in the city to restrict the building and expansion of infrastructure that is for the purpose of storing and transporting fossil fuels in Portland. We also adopted or created the Biketown Bike Share program, which you may have seen these orange bikes around town. Bike sharing and car sharing are important tools and programs that can happen in cities that enable people to have a variety of options to move around the city that doesn't require them to basically bring their car with them everywhere. In just the first couple of months that this bike share program launched, people rode the bikes enough miles to go 15 times around the earth. So it's been very successful. We also, the City of Portland, adopted an updated comprehensive plan and transportation system plan. So these are the big plans that the city uses to really guide the development and the investment going forward into future years, like out to 2035. And so we use these plans, both of those plans are aligned around creating walkable, vibrant communities where people have good access to jobs and transit and parks, and that they can walk and bike and get around without needing to get in their vehicle. And so these plans set that vision for us and help guide us in the decisions that we need to make in order to achieve that goal. Another thing that we did, we were the first city in the United States to adopt a requirement that for homes that are 100 years old or older, you can no longer demolish them, meaning you can't knock them down with a bulldozer. Instead, you have to deconstruct them, which means they have to be taken apart piece by piece, and all of those materials have to be salvaged for reuse. And it also created a great opportunity for us to do job training. This picture here is a picture of a training that we did focused on providing the skills to do this type of work to people who historically have been underserved in the construction industry, including women, people of color, and formerly incarcerated individuals. So it's a new skill that is required in the city to comply with this new law that created some job opportunities for us as well. Portlanders recycle and compost 70% of their waste stream. That's one of the highest rates in the U.S. And different programs that we've done have helped us to achieve that, including the food scrap composting at the curbside that Portlanders can do, as well as every other week garbage. And those programs have helped us reduce the amount of waste going to the landfill by 1/3. So it helped us achieve a significant reduction in our waste stream. Oh. Goodness, I skipped a bunch there. The other thing that we focus on is food and local food systems. This picture here is of a new community orchard that was built in Lentz. This is a piece of city property that formerly had just been left sort of somewhat abandoned. It had 8-foot-high blackberry bushes and attracted garbage and other nuisance activities. And we worked with the community there to clear it out and to put in this community orchard. We also do a lot of work to green the city, focusing things like planting trees, removing invasive species, working with schools to plant trees at schools, particularly in parts of the city that don't have a lot of trees, helping low-income Portlanders maintain and remove damaged trees and get new trees installed. For climate change, we're also working to address the impacts of climate change. And one of the things that we're really concerned about is heat and future heat waves and higher temperatures. This map here is an urban heat island map where the red areas are the parts of the city that tend to be hotter than other areas. You can see Forest Park and some other areas there are cooler. So we're doing a lot of work to understand how heat manifests in the city and what we can do to address it and cool the city down, particularly in areas that are hot, that overlap where there's concentrations of people who are more susceptible to heat, including older adults living alone, low-income people, et cetera. Portland voters made a really strong statement about the importance of being able to safely walk and bike and get kids to school by adopting a 10-cent per gallon local gas tax. And that revenue helps us to create a stable funding source for a lot of the transportation improvements that we need to do that will enable us to reduce those transportation emissions. We also have to walk the talk and make sure that the city government itself is implementing the energy efficiency actions that we need residents and businesses to do. 100% of the city's electricity comes from renewable power, and a lot of that is generated on site through solar arrays and biogas generation. And lastly, the last couple of examples I want to give, we're working hard to help electrify the transportation system and to make sure that low-income people have affordable access to these vehicles and the benefits they provide. And lastly, the Tillicum Crossing is a great example, I think, of an infrastructure investment. It's the largest car-free bridge in the country, and it's part of the expansion of the light rail system as well, which really enables people to move around the city in ways that don't require cars. And I think this bridge represents the future of our city in terms of those types of investments. So this is the website where you'll find all of the information about the city and county's climate work, including progress reports on all of those 170 some odd actions, a few of which I just talked here about. So thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Michelle. Our next speaker is Nancy Hamilton of the Oregon Business Climate Alliance. For almost 2 decades, Nancy has developed deep relationships with a diverse cross-section of stakeholders in the Portland metro area and across Oregon. She worked first as Chief of Staff to Mayor Tom Potter, then on Workforce and Economic Development for Governor Kulongoski, then as Market Director for McKinstry, Oregon. Now in her 6th year as a certified emerging small business and women business enterprise consultant, Nancy has focused on public process efforts and economic development programs. She has a particular interest in carbon reduction and energy efficiency. She will share her perspective on reduction of our carbon footprint from the perspective of the business community. Nancy.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you all for having us tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to share what each of us is doing. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about not just the city of Portland, but really what the state of Oregon is looking to do, and an organization that I've been working with since it came into being a short 7 months ago or so. The Oregon Business Alliance for Climate was created back in June of, how do I do this? The screen? Oh, okay. We were formed back in June as a response to a lot of businesses who said, there's this mythology out there that business is opposed to a cap and invest program and pricing carbon in our state as part of this bigger solution. And we now have almost 75 members, and we have focused almost exclusively on large to mid-sized businesses. So we're not going after restaurants or retail street, Main Street sorts of businesses. We're going after large companies who operate in Oregon and in many cases nationally and internationally, because we felt it was very important to go to Salem with a voice that said, these aren't your usual suspects. There are folks who really strongly support this and believe there's a viable business opportunity in moving to a clean energy economy, and we're here to tell you that we're one of those folks. Some of the profiled members we have include Vigor. I don't know if you're familiar with Vigor, a big boat manufacturer, and I'm not talking like a sailboat. These guys build like aircraft carriers and tankers and things like that. They're a massive shipbuilding company here in Oregon. They are diversifying their business opportunity by developing crafts that can work with wave and ocean wind energy. And they see just a whole new opportunity to build crafts all over the world. Most recently, they had an Irish company who purchased one of their large crafts for a wave energy project on the windward side of Oahu. So we also have Skanska, international construction firm. They do a lot of work here in Oregon. They're Danish, and half of the world that they do business in is already operating under a carbon pricing policy. They just want certainty, they want predictability, they want consistency. And they make money and do really well-designed and built, highly energy-efficient buildings all over the place. 3 Mile Canyon, they're the largest cattle ranch that provides cheese and dairy products to Tillamook. Rose City Disposal and Recycling, Nike, we were very excited to get Nike on board in December. Cypress Creek Renewables, they do grid-scale solar power farms. They've done all the large solar farms in the state of Oregon, and they're looking at some very interesting, innovative ways to do carbon sequestration in concert with the farms they're developing. Pacific Ethanol, Deschutes Brewery, New Seasons, Willamette Valley Vineyards, Pacific Ag, Dutch Bros. The coffee industry globally is at enormous risk because of climate change. They're really concerned about the capacity to maintain crops in places around the world where coffee beans are grown, and Dutch Bros is very focused on this issue. Michelle mentioned car share operations, Uber, also Lyft, Moda, Providence, and as well as the Portland Clinic. Again, this is a healthcare issue. It's expensive to treat people who are sick because the earth is poisoning us. And so large healthcare providers are concerned about this from a bottom line perspective. They think it's cheaper to have healthy people. EC Company, they're a large commercial, industrial, electrical company. They have business all over the state, here in Portland, as well as out in Bend and Coos Bay. They have offices. They employ all union folks. They're an extraordinary locally based company. And of course, we have the Timbers and the Thorns, who of course were last season our national champions. So I always like to do a little shout out for the Thorns. Mm-hmm. The Timbers get way too much attention compared to the Thorns. It's a guy thing, I guess. So the Alliance came together, and we decided that we really wanted to look at how to approach as a business organization, what would we support? And what kinds of principles and thinking would have to go into something that this organization of 75 members and growing would consider supporting. Key principles include reducing Oregon's emissions through a well-designed market-based carbon pricing program, which is why we got behind in a big way the cap and invest legislation that we almost got over the finish line in the short session. I can tell you more about that if you'd like. It needs to align with not just the City of Portland's goals, but the state climate goals. So whatever these carbon reduction programs do, they have to help us lower those carbon emissions statewide based on what we've said we need to be doing as a state. It needs to maintain the viability and competitive health of existing Oregon businesses. You know, carbon doesn't recognize state borders. And if we take our energy-intensive, trade-exposed businesses and we charge them so much that they move, a big example of this is food processors over in Ontario, right along the border of Idaho. They could move across the border. We will lose jobs. We will lose income to the state, and the carbon is still going to get emitted. So we want to do this thoughtfully so that we help these companies develop a glide path toward these carbon emission reductions that will continue to change over time. It's called EITEs, energy intensive trade exposed companies, and the term that you might hear bandied about is leakage, and that's the notion that businesses will just move to another state to avoid being regulated. And with federal inaction, this is an issue. States are toggling back and forth about how do we work together, and the West Coast, as Michelle said, has really taken up, we think, some of the slack that has been sadly not there from a federal perspective. And our hope is that we can get enough states moving along with this program that can be replicated in other places, that there'll be a tipping point when there's finally a federal action attitude. We'll already be very close, and it'll be easy to move to a federal program. We also believe it's important to anticipate pricing and regulation flexibility that adjusts over time. The reason we don't like a tax is because it's either too high or too low all the time. It's static, it doesn't change, it doesn't give businesses an opportunity to innovate. One of the things I know coming from an economic development background is large businesses, well, all businesses, do a really good job of keeping your bottom line down. And I have an obligation to my shareholders if I'm publicly traded or if I have investors. And polluting carbon into the air has been a really cheap idea. It's really inexpensive for polluters to do that. If that becomes expensive, they're going to figure out ways to not pollute so much. And so what private sector does better, I think, than government is it innovates. And it innovates in a way that helps keep costs down. And we think a cap and trade program really encourages that much more than a tax. No, what? You just have to talk to it because it doesn't, is that it? Okay. Okay. We also want to make sure that those most vulnerable among us are not held to hold the burden of price increases that may exist. We want to make sure that the impacts of utility rates and fuel prices are not felt by those least capable of addressing those, low-income communities, communities of color, and our rural communities. It's a lot easier to do a multimodal transportation plan in an urban core than it is in fossil Oregon. And so how do we make sure that folks who are driving big trucks and having to move goods and services and family from here to there over long distances aren't bearing the brunt of this? That's a big concern for us as an organization. And we also want to put Oregon in a position to advance clean energy alternatives and contribute to worldwide efforts to decarbonize the global economy. Oregon has led on some significant issues historically, and it's time we stepped back to the front of this line. We're way, way behind our peers and our counterparts. Other states are doing this, other countries are doing this much more thoughtfully and strategically than we are. It's time for us to jump that line and get back in front. Another very, very important issue is we want to encourage linkage to carbon markets in other jurisdictions. And carbon markets is a really convoluted trading structure that we feel it's very important that Oregon be part of. So there's a thing called the Western Climate Initiative. California is part of it. Ontario, Canada is part of it, Quebec is part of it, and other states. Washington is looking, although it just failed, at a carbon tax instead. But we feel it's very important to have partners we can trade with. Our goal is to reduce carbon emissions, and one of the ways we can do that is through carbon sequestration. And if you have, the Warm Springs tribe has a really great example of this. They recently decided to sequester a huge percentage of their timberlands. And there are units that are defined by a third-party not-for-profit that say, okay, that many trees is going to sequester X units of carbon, and they can sell those into the carbon market. This is providing millions and millions of dollars a year for 20 years to the Warm Springs tribes. They have a 70% unemployment rate. It's a big deal that we be able to trade the profit opportunity in not cutting stuff down. So there's a real value in that, and we think we need to be part of this bigger group. And then we obviously want to make sure that some of the proceeds that are generated from a cap and trade program help generate money for innovation and economic growth. I'm going really slowly here. Over half the world is already operating under a carbon trading policy. So those of you, and you hear from sometimes, oh, we shouldn't be first. It's too scary. Why does Portland always have to be so weird? Let's, just wait. And we're way behind people. There's nothing we're doing to lead in passing a cap and trade policy in the state of Oregon. California is already doing this. They just reauthorized their cap and trade program. They're beating their 2020 goals already for greenhouse gas reductions. Their population is up. Their consumption is down. Their emissions are down. Their petroleum consumption, it's very similar to the Portland numbers that Michelle shared. And there are a couple of examples here of what's happened in California. There's an electric bus manufacturer called Proterra. When they heard about the cap and trade program in California, they actually moved their manufacturing headquarters to California because they wanted to be closer to their marketplace. They're now employing hundreds and hundreds of people. They've now expanded up in the Northern California market. And so big business thinks this is smart. And so you'll hear businesses opposed. The fact of the matter is some businesses are opposed. Many, many big businesses are in support. One last thing, you talked about the West Coast, Linda. There is a thing called the Regi States, and that's 9 East Coast states that are doing this just for the electricity markets, not around petroleum. Again, the economy is booming, emissions are down, everything is thriving and healthy, so people will be afraid of this and tell you they're afraid something terrible is going to happen. It simply hasn't happened everywhere else that it's been put in place. Another example, battery storage. And I guess my closing comment is cap and invest is good for Oregon's economy, and all of these businesses we have so far agree. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nancy. Finally, we will hear from Liz Zavodsky of the Northwest Earth Institute. Liz is the Director of Membership and Engagement. She oversees program engagement with businesses nationwide, with sponsorship and corporate partnerships. She's been connected with Northwest Earth Institute since 2007, starting as a student, then as an intern, then as a volunteer, and now finally getting paid as staff. She is inspired by the Institute's values and dynamic process of creating community and engaging individuals through discussion courses and eco-challenge. She received her BA from the University of Northern Colorado and her MA in Human Development from the University of Denver. So she will tell us how Northwest Earth Institute is strategizing about reducing Portland's carbon footprint and how our community can be engaged to continue this work. Liz.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for everything you shared. I think this is a really dynamic trio that we've got going on. I know that was mentioned earlier, because we've looked at that city level, and the state, we've looked at businesses, and again the state, and now I'm here to kind of bring it down a little bit to the individual level. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I am with the Northwest Earth Institute. We are a nonprofit here in Portland. We've been around since 1993, so this year we are celebrating our 25th anniversary, which is very exciting for us. Our mission is to inspire people to take responsibility for the planet. So everything that we've heard today, everything that we've heard, the goals that are around, people that are buying in, businesses that are buying in, all the hard work that the city is doing to really make a difference for us, it takes impact from individuals and residents. And it takes us getting engaged in these different topics. And that is what our organization is here to do. We want to bring people into these different topics that connect to sustainability, connect to climate change and the environment. We do that through 2 different programs. One of the programs we do that with is our discussion course books. You can see those on the bottom corner of the screen. We have 10 different discussion course books focused on various topics of sustainability like peace, justice, transportation, community, food, simplicity, nature, sustainability in the workplace. There's a lot of different avenues. And our goal in these discussion courses is to bring people together, whether it be face-to-face in small groups or virtually. We also do that as well. And to help people think about these different topics, connect with one another on them, have personal reflection, and then decide what action you want to take as it relates to these different issues as well. We do not do the writing of these books. We cultivate that writing. We look for book chapters, newspaper articles, magazine articles. We contact the authors and the publishers, and we get permission to use them in this format. So we bring a lot of different perspectives to these issues because we know that all of us are very, very different in our understanding and our passion for the environment and where we stand with climate change and what we can do about it. So we want to bring people together to read different articles that have different opinions and different processes and suggestions for actions for people to take, and then have you all talk about it and discuss it and decide, okay, which is the best route for me to go. The other program that we offer is called Eco Challenge. On the bottom corner of the screen, you can see we have a Drawdown Eco Challenge happening in April. This is more of a virtual program. The discussion courses are physical paperback books that can be done face-to-face with a small group of people in the workplace, faith, community, neighborhood, book group, anything like that. The Drawdown Eco Challenge is something that is done online. This year we are partnering with Project Drawdown. I know there is a copy of the book on the table here this evening. So for anyone here who is interested in learning more about it, you can flip through that copy. But Project Drawdown is a nonprofit organization that is focusing on the 100 global solutions that can combat global warming. Things that companies, businesses, cities, states, and individuals can do to have an impact on climate change and to really start reversing climate change and global warming. So we're excited to partner with this organization. Paul Hawken is the founder of this organization and really spearheaded this. And many of the scientists and researchers that he worked with to create this book and this nonprofit actually are based in Portland. We have a lot of Portland folks who helped contribute to the solutions that they identified. And the greatest part about it is, well, for me, when I think of climate change, when I think of health impacts of climate change, when I think of economic impacts of climate change, it gets very, very big and daunting. And so our programs are designed to help us bring it down, help us see that, wait a minute, I have a role I can play. I have actions that I can take. So through these eco-challenge programs, what we ask people to do is commit to 1 to 3 actions that you want to take, something that's new and different, something you're not already doing. And we want you to sign up. So this year, the Drawdown Eco Challenge is April 4th through the 25th. If you would like to sign up, you certainly can. And I have postcards in the back of the room as well for you to take if you'd like. You would go to drawdown.ecochallenge.org. And what you do is you would look at all of the different actions we offer. We have a library of actions in many different categories. We have 8 different categories, focus on food, transportation, water, energy, women and girls. Who knew that's related to climate change? So there's a lot of educational bits in there too. And what you do is you'd select 1 to 3 actions that you want to try out for those 21 days of the challenge. And every day of the 21 days of the Eco Challenge, we would ask you to do those actions. See if you can create new habits. See if you can align your actions with your values as it relates to climate change and the environment and what you can do about it. Help the city of Portland reach their carbon goals and their climate action plan goals by taking action in your own life, because everything we do matters. Help the businesses that you support and love in Portland reach their goals and stay committed to these things by aligning your actions and values together as well. The other thing I wanted to note is not only is taking action important, but educating ourselves is really important as well. So if you're just curious to learn more about anything that we've said, there's plenty of resources in Oregon. There's plenty of resources in Portland. We're very, very lucky. Through our discussion courses, you can look at those as a reader. You can learn more through reading those articles. And you can also learn more by going to the Eco Challenge website, because those actions, some of them are, hey, watch this 3-minute video on deforestation so you understand deforestation and the impact that it has on climate change a little bit more. So we try to offer educational tidbits wherever we can to help people feel a little bit more connected to those larger issues and understand how it fits in our life. Okay.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you all. And the first thing, let me say that if any of you have questions you'd like to ask, raise your hand. Someone will bring you a card, and the cards will come up here, and we will look through those. But first, do you have questions for each other? This is your chance to ask each other some questions.
I do too. So I actually have questions for both of you. Nancy, my question for you is, in order to tackle the really hard, sticky stuff that we need to tackle to get to where we need to go, it's really going to take business and government coming together in partnership and alignment to move that forward. And I was just curious, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for that to happen, particularly in my context from related to local government and businesses? Like, what do you see as the great opportunities there?
Well, I think I would answer it 2 ways. One, as you know, because I just spent a bunch of time talking about it, the Alliance is really focused on getting cap and trade passed in Oregon, because the largest industrial polluters contribute so much, a disproportionate percentage of the carbon going into the atmosphere in Oregon. And so we believe that if we are able to cap carbon at 25,000 tons per year, we can start to really see a difference quickly if we get those large industrial polluters and fossil fuel providers paying for that, the price of that carbon. The other thing, though, that I think we can do, and cap and trade, I think will help this, but regardless, I'm working with the city of Bend, and they have a climate action plan as well. And they're looking at a whole ecosystem of their city and their surrounding entities. And they're now doing a really big community engagement plan, and sort of what you were talking about, getting everybody to recognize what their role and part of that is. And I think having a carrot and a stick are really important. In different parts of the state, the thing that motivates people is really different. In Central Oregon, they're really concerned about increased fuel prices because it takes them longer and it takes more time and money to get their goods and services to market. But they really deeply care about the natural environment that they moved to the Bend area to live in, whether it's skiing or hiking or the high desert. And so we have this interesting combination of folks out in that part of the state. So I think it's really important to understand what motivates your community. And it's really different from place to place. And I believe there is a role for regulation, and there's a role for the free market to innovate. So.
Anyone else of the three of you have a question for the others?
I do. So I had a couple of questions for both of you. I was fascinated. I know about the new regulation around home scores. How does a seller figure out what their score would be on their home and have, I assume it hasn't been in place long enough to have any longitudinal studies, but what are you hoping to see to motivate change with homeowners?
Yeah. So to get one of those scores, there are home assessors, so people who are trained to do that sort of an assessment. It just takes, my understanding is, about an hour to do. It's pretty affordable. We're still waiting to see what in the end it ends up costing, but we estimate about $150 to have that assessment done. And what it does is a part of that assessment also identifies the opportunities to improve the score. So it's not just a score, but it's like, if you want to increase the score, here are some things that can be done to improve the efficiency of the home that would cause that score to go up. So the long-term goal is that providing transparency about that information does a couple of things. It encourages a seller to make those investments in their home in order for their home to be more attractive to prospective buyers. So if you're going to take out a loan to make improvements to your home, you're often going to redo your kitchen or your bathroom because it helps with the resale value of your home. Insulation and new windows doesn't necessarily currently do that, but this score would hopefully prevent or create the market incentive for you to make those investments, because you would see that benefit in terms of the resale value of your home. So that's the goal, and so that score is done by professionals, and it provides a lot of useful information for both the seller and the prospective buyer about opportunities to improve that score.
I have a question that I was hoping that one of you would address, and I suspect it may be on other people's minds too. What are the major components of Portland's carbon footprint? You mentioned, Nancy, you mentioned some of them: transportation and energy for buildings. So if one wants to do a carbon footprint score, I looked at this and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't do this. What are the things that individuals can think about most? I guess this relates to your 100 actions as well. What are the major things that individuals can think about and perhaps make some changes in that relate to a carbon footprint of their own and as part of the larger society?
That's a great question. A few things. I think there's some great online carbon footprint calculators that someone can do individually. I think transportation, food waste, water excess use, and energy waste is, to me, those are the top four that keep returning. I don't know that specifically for Portland. Please hear that. I do not know that to be true specifically for Portland data, but I know that that is very, very common amongst all of the data that we have done through participants over time. I think it's important for us to recognize, I care about the environment, I care about what's happening to it, so therefore in the wintertime, I don't need to be sitting in my living room in a t-shirt. It's okay for me to turn down the thermostat a little bit and to put on a sweater. So thinking about that action of what can I do that might, turn down the thermostat in the wintertime, turn it up a little bit more in the summertime. So we're watching our energy use, watching our food waste, water, all of that, and our transportation for sure. I know that's huge. One other thing that I want to mention is last October, because we do the Eco Challenge every year, and this year we're doing it in April and October. Every October we offer a very general Eco Challenge. All of these are always free and open to the public. Thank you to business sponsors that we have. And we partnered with the City of Portland and Portland State University last year, and we have a research intern looking at all of the data from anyone who participated in the Eco Challenge last year who lives in Portland, and I think there was over 5,000 people that fit that. We are looking at the data of actions that they chose to take for those 2 weeks, because last year it was 15 days, not 21 days. So we're looking at the data, the actions that they chose to take on for those 15 days and how successful they were, because in the Eco Challenge we ask you to check in every day and tell us how it's going, because we want to build that new action to create a new habit. So we are actually meeting tomorrow with our research intern to get the executive summary, and we'll be sharing that out.
Wonderful. Be sure to let us know how we can find that. I think that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you.
Can I offer a footnote to that? I think, the other thing, and other folks have alluded to this, but it's really important to remember that energy efficiency is the smartest way to reduce your carbon footprint. A kilowatt not spent is always the cleanest kilowatt. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about solar panels and, return heat systems, which are awesome. But if you don't ever use that kilowatt of energy, you're doing the best you can. And I think we overlook energy efficiency, and that's the other thing. Cities and school districts, in Portland, for instance, Portland Public Schools is the single largest landowner in the city, other than the City of Portland, and it's only because the City of Portland owns Forest Park. And they have a huge portfolio of assets. They're now looking to, work very diligently. They're on their 7th phase of energy efficiency work. And the public always wants to see more solar panels. It's like, well, there's this really boring stuff going on in the bowels of those buildings that's saving money. Every dollar you don't spend on that goes into the classroom. Same thing with operating dollars for cities and other special districts. So I think it's the unsung hero of this whole conversation is the energy efficiency opportunity we have. And it's not something we're taking enough advantage of.
Nancy, I had a question for you. You said that there are 170 actions that the city and the county are taking to reduce our carbon footprint. And there are some challenges, a small number, I think 5 to 7% or whatever it was. What are some of the challenges?
Yes, so it varies. Oftentimes the challenges, so there are sort of 2 buckets there. One were things we haven't started yet, and others were things that we've started but are facing obstacles. Oftentimes those are funding related, or things like, I think the cap and invest is another one, where we have actions in the climate action plan where we need to move forward on this, but it's just we're moving forward, but we're not necessarily on track to get it completed. We have some actions that just because of work plan issues, we just haven't had the opportunity to start yet. I'm trying to think of what some of those are, but none of them. Tim Lynch from Multnomah County, who's my counterpart, is here. I don't know if you remember any of the not started yet ones. It's usually funding related, where we just haven't quite secured the funding yet to move forward on something, or we're focusing on something else and we're planning to do those actions later in the year. But by and large, I think cap and invest aside, most of them are not really big significant stuff. We've been able to really get the really big hard stuff underway.
Are there any things that our neighbors in neighboring states like California or in the Northeast or even other countries that are really ahead of us doing that seem like things we should be doing but aren't? Are there any good examples?
I can start with that, and you may have some great ideas as well. As I was saying, necessity is the mother of invention, and the woman sitting in the front row was talking about a gentleman from Ontario, Canada, who came down and spoke in Salem during the short session. And one of the stories he tells is about the production of concrete. Cement is a really dirty manufacturing process. It's one of the highest carbon emitting processes out there. Paper and pulp and cement are two of the worst emitters. And there was this large cement manufacturing firm up there, and they started getting regulated, so it started getting really expensive for them to do business as usual. And they have now innovated and created a new version of cement, and it's lighter weight, and it self heals. I mean, that's me, those are my words, not his. He's much more eloquent. And it's less expensive, and it's a ton cleaner. And so I feel like we have no idea what some of these things are going to be. One of the other big pollutants that California has identified is, idling ships. Long Beach, we have huge port systems down in California. And ships that idle with diesel are really, really dirty. And Vigor is looking at electrification models for large ships. And so, there's stuff all around us that we can be doing on a huge scale that will transform and disrupt how business is done. I think the same thing with transportation modalities and energy storage are the other two really big sort of disruptive things that we ain't seen nothing yet. It's very exciting.
There was a question from the audience relating to diesel emissions. What about them? How important are they? And what are the things that can do? You mentioned the idling ships, but are there other things that can be done to limit diesel emissions?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that, and then Michelle, you may have some ideas as well. But the electrification of the transportation system is going to help, and if you create renewable energy systems that aren't using coal to create electricity, you can really start to make a change. 40%, if we pass cap and trade, about 40% of the dollars that will be generated and reinvested in transportation infrastructure will come from fuel providers who are out of state. This is money not from Oregonians. These are Shell and BP and Exxon are going to be paying into Oregon to do that. And so again, the more expensive it gets to do business that way, the more you're going to start to see other forms of transportation, as well as bicycles and really simple things like clustering your errands. I have a good friend who owned swaths of large car dealerships all over the country. He was one of the biggest car dealerships in the country. And he was in Spain a few years ago and said, I watched the innovations happening in driverless vehicles, and he was looking to retire eventually, but he ramped it up and he got out of the business because he said, I just don't know how to make that radical shift. Cars are going to start being things we don't own, but that move around and do things for us all day. So they aren't going to be parking everywhere, and they're going to be electrified, and so they're going to be clean, they're going to be moving multiple people, they'll go get your dry cleaning handled. I mean, so people think this is sci-fi, and it's actually, I told my 19-year-old daughter, I think you're the last generation of people, when you have kids, they're not going to know how to drive. They're just going to get in a car and it'll take them wherever it is they want to go, or get on some other mode of transportation, and it'll be just how things move around. And so getting away from those fossil fuels and then really, really radically rethinking how people and stuff moves are going to be things that my grandchildren, it's going to be common practice.
I think for me, the linkage there is a really important one. A lot of the things like that I talked about that the city of Portland and Multnomah County are doing, we're doing those things not just because it reduces carbon emissions. We're doing those things because it creates a healthier, more livable, vibrant, safer community. And so those things that we do to help address air quality issues also help us to address climate, and those things we do to address climate also help us to improve the health and safety of our community. And so it's really important, I think, to understand and maximize those benefits. We often call them co-benefits, of where we're taking these actions not for a singular reason, but for multiple, and we can achieve a lot of our, many of our goals through these actions, not just reduce climate. or carbon emissions.
One of the questions that came up through the audience was, is the probability of a major earthquake taken into consideration in the climate action plan? A lot of people are worried about these fuel storage things that are on very, very unstable ground, and people talk about it all the time, but I don't know what, if anything, is going beyond the talking stage.
So yes, I think there's, the two phenomenons are not necessarily linked. Climate change isn't necessarily going to cause earthquakes or vice versa. No. But the things that we do to build our resilience to earthquakes and/or build our resilience to the impacts of climate change can also help us if the other thing happens. And so, for example, transitioning away from fossil fuels for transportation, moving people and goods around helps us to reduce carbon emissions. It also means that then there's fewer fossil fuels that are, and those systems at risk in the event of a big earthquake. And so the things that we do to improve the efficiency of our water, pumps, talking about conserving water is important, because if you saw the city's electricity bill for how much money, it's millions and millions of dollars that are spent moving water and wastewater around through our pumps and our pipes. So the things that we do to improve the efficiency of those pumps also means that they're hardened and are likely to survive better in the event of an earthquake, for example. So again, it gets to that where we're trying to achieve multiple goals through the investments and the plans and the changes that we make, not just carbon goals, not just earthquake resilience, but where are the opportunities to achieve all of those goals together.
And I would say at a statewide level, when you're out in Bend or you're out in Harney County or in other parts of the state that are further away from either the I-84 or I-5 corridor or from along the coast, the concern about getting anything if there's a major earthquake is a really terrifying prospect for folks, the further away from those main transportation grid systems. And there's a lot of discussion, again, around resiliency. And if you can do distributed, non-grid distributed power structures, I don't know if you've heard of Bitcoin, blockchain technology, where you basically get utilities out of the middle of it. And I'm sending my excess battery stored electricity over to Michelle, and then I'm sending it to Liz, and we're dealing with this stuff directly. And I think that stuff sounds wacky right now, but I think in a handful of years it's going to be not wacky at all. And those are major opportunities for resiliency in the event of a large natural disaster.
So are there any countries that do that now, that have these distributed energy storage?
No, there are some pilot projects happening in Brooklyn, in some parts of Australia, and a couple of other places around the world that I know they're happening in other places, but I don't know where. But it's very small pilot program work right now, but I think that's the kind of stuff that's going to be this flywheel tipping point. It's going to happen really fast, and we're going to see some pretty radical disruptive change.
So does Portland have the infrastructure that we need to reduce our carbon footprint while maintaining quality of life? I think this takes into everything. It certainly takes into account transportation. What are the infrastructure things that we can do that don't cost more energy, that don't make us dependent on more energy, other than bicycling?
So I think, no, we don't currently have that infrastructure. Our infrastructure is based on this existing model that is based on fossil fuels. And so in order, the graph that I showed to get to that 80% reduction in emissions by 2050, if you can imagine what a city looks like that is operating on just a fraction of the carbon emissions that it operates on today, that's a pretty transformative shift. And I think that we have some ideas of, as Nancy said, these disruptive changes that are really just going to change the paradigm for us and how we think about how we power our buildings, how we operate our city, how we move goods and services around the city. It's a lot of it, we have some inklings of those changes, but a lot of it is yet to be seen and is really, I think, going to be things that we just couldn't necessarily imagine. I think automated vehicles is a good example, where right now we're in this space where we're like, I'm not sure I can imagine what that's going to be like to have cars without drivers driving around. But there's opportunity there, right? If we can create the infrastructure and the policies and the systems that ensure that those vehicles are shared, meaning multiple people are riding in them. It's not just we each individually have our own automated car that's circling the block so it doesn't have to pay for parking, but that it's something that's shared and we're all sharing it, that they're all powered by renewable electricity. It would really transform how we think about moving around the city. And so I think a lot of it is yet to be seen and imagined. Some of it is starting to happen now. And then there are other examples, I think, like the Tillicum Crossing is a good example where we invested, millions. I think it's a $140 million project, and there are no cars going across it. I think that's a way of saying that is what our infrastructure of the future looks like.
Michelle, do you think that it takes those of us who live here to be a part of that equation, to be a part of that reality?
Absolutely. And because as we get further out, those decisions and those paradigm shifts are harder and harder to figure out and to really come to terms with. Change is hard, and we have to be able to work through it together. It's hard for institutions like government to change and shift. It's hard for individuals to change, for businesses. And so together we have to collectively know what we're shooting for and really be committed to each other to work together to figure out how to get there, because we know that we can't stay sort of doing things the way we've always done them in the past, because that's just gotten us into the pickle that we're in now, and it's not going to get us out of it.
Yeah.
I think, as with everything else, it's the people that are difficult. It's not the concepts. We all can come up with the concepts, and there are people who can build the things, but it's the people and the political process that have to say, okay, it's time to do this. And how do you motivate political processes? How do you motivate individuals? How do you get people to say, okay, I can do this. My little bit is going to be helpful enough to me and other people that I'm going to do it. And how do you get the larger process to say, okay, it's time we did this?
I can speak on that for just a little bit around our programs and our approach. Last year I mentioned we had our October Eco Challenge event. We had over 12,000 people participate from 2,100 different cities, and we had 70 countries represented last year participating as well. So it was very inspiring to us. And what we found was that people were willing to just try one new thing. They were willing to take shorter showers. They were willing to say, you know what, I take 12-minute showers. I should try to take 8-minute showers. And they were willing to try to do that and to see how that impacted their life in a positive way and in a challenging way also. So we're asking people to take on actions like that and see how it fits with them. We're asking people to carry their trash around with them for 2 weeks. And in Portland, Oregon, it's actually easier to do than in other places because we are so lucky to be able to compost and to be able to recycle as much as we can. Now, that was before some of the recycling changes that have happened, so I think it would look different now. But it's really fascinating what you can learn about yourself and what you can learn about your abilities, what you can and can't do if you just say, okay, I'm really going to commit to shorter showers. I'm really going to commit to turning off my computer at night or shutting down the lights when I leave a room. These small things can really add up, and then it can be a lot of fun for you. And another way that we try to inspire people and motivate people is through the Eco Challenge program. We have points and prizes and all that kind of fun stuff as well, but prizes are not a lot of stuff. We try for, that's the hard thing. But, and then something else that's really powerful actually is you can see a visual, if you participate in the Eco Challenge, you can see a visual of the impact for yourself, for the team that you're on, and collectively. So last year, you could see the collective impact of what over 12,000 people had in a 2-week period. And it was really impressive and really inspiring to see those numbers add up to all the good things that people were doing. So I think that's really powerful. And recognizing what you already do. It's okay to say, you know what, I do so many things. List them out. Pat yourself on the back. Be proud of what you do, and recognize, even though we are in the great city of Portland and the great state of Oregon that I love dearly, we can all do a little bit more.
And I would say my answer to that question would be to get kids more involved. When I'm not busy working with the Alliance for Climate, I do almost all of my work is in K-12. And I work with the architectural firms and the facilities folks who are creating buildings that are more energy efficient. And consistently, I find that kids don't generally have a clue about this. And once they do, they are they're the easiest group to change, first of all. The older you get, no offense to all of us here, but the harder it is to change. And kids are curious, and they respond to points and prizes and seeing things rolling on a real number reel. And, the Portland, Sunnyside Environmental School is, the most popular K-8 in the district because it's doing that. It's like, why don't we do that in all the schools? Instead of making everybody try to get into that one school. I'm working with Amoresco, who's an energy services provider, and they're doing all the efficiency work in the district. And I now have them working with a group of students at Wilson High School, and they're developing a video to show, what does this mean in real life around carbon reduction and energy efficiency, and how many dollars does that mean going to the classroom, and what kinds of jobs could we be doing if we're in that world? So I could be an engineer, I could be an electrician, I could be a carpenter, and they're going to be presenting that to the school board. And I think that when you look at what happened in Florida after that last shooting, those kids have been able to get something done that those of us who, no offense to anybody who holds a different position on this, but who are focused on gun control issues, have been trying to do this for decades, and those kids just said, enough. And so I think we really need to double down on engaging young people in this.
For me, two things came to mind. One is in terms of what my experience has been about what has helped motivate and create big shifts in terms of city government, and two things. One is, I think, advocacy from the community. The example that I gave about the restricting fossil fuel infrastructure, there is no way that the city would have pursued that if it had not been for very strong advocacy from the community. And so I think that that is a very powerful tool that can really help to shift elected officials and city staff to take bolder steps. And then the second thing is, Portland is known around the world as a leader in this, and that's a reputation that we like to keep and maintain. And as Nancy was saying, we want to be always towards the top of any list that comes out about this stuff. So that means that there's a lot of great competition that happens between Portland and other cities who are also those top cities. And so often being able to say, well, Seattle's about to do this, and so if we do it first, or these other cities have done this and we're really far behind, I can't, let's get caught up and let's see how we can one up those other cities. And so that friendly competition with other cities is great, and we work really closely with our counterpart staff in those other cities to help them do the same thing. And so it's a very congenial relationship, and that sense of competition helps us to constantly be trying to move forward faster than other cities.
That's good. And I think to wrap up, I would like to have some thoughts from you on the political situation. There were a couple of questions. One said, please describe what happened to Cap and Invest in the 2018 session and what are the prospects for 2019. And so it would be interesting to see what you think about that. I mean, all of the indications I had was that, 2019, this will happen. But will there be organized opposition from the business community or any other community, and how can we work with that?
I can answer most of that. So those of you who were tracking the Cap and Invest legislation in the 2018 short session, there was, I think, just an incredible effort to try to get this passed in the short session. We had folks coming from Renew Oregon. There was this huge coalition of environmental organizations. Our alliance was down there. We had business people going and testifying. We were meeting with legislators all the time, both in district and in the building down in Salem once session started. We met with the governor and the governor's key staff. as did a lot of other folks. And I think to your point about, a voice pushing on our legislators saying, you're not going to stay in office if you don't support this, or it's okay, I've got your back, you can support this, because you're going to have a couple of different kinds of concerns from legislators. The legislation didn't pass, but we got, it's about as good as it gets without a win. So the hope had been that we would pass this in 2018, there would be a 3-year rulemaking process, and we would launch a cap and invest program in 2021. A lot of the opposition sort of landed in 2 places. One was, hell no, don't regulate me. I don't want you to make me pay for anything. And just for everybody's knowledge, there would be under 100 businesses in the state of Oregon who would be regulated. So it's not your local gas station. It's not the restaurant where you go for brunch. It's not, any of those Main Street places. It's large polluters and importers of fossil fuel. And they're opposed. Utilities are really all over the map. PGE was opposed, but has been at the table in good faith. And they have some concerns and questions, and they want some freebies, and they're negotiating. Pacific Core said not in 18, but we would be happy to have this conversation prior to 19, and so time will tell if they really do. Northwest Natural really hasn't been in the center of this because it's a fuel source that isn't in the thick of this conversation, generally speaking. Peter Courtney, the president of the Senate, refused to hear it on the Senate floor on principle, because when short sessions were created in Oregon, they were intended to be used for housekeeping and emergency budget issues and nothing else. Now, we've passed a $15 an hour minimum wage and healthcare in short sessions, so it's not like we haven't created a precedent, but that was his rationale for this. And at the end of session, we had a commitment of $1.4 million from the Joint Ways and Means Committee that was voted through and approved by the governor to create a carbon office. That office is going to spend the next 10 months studying leakage, those energy-intensive, trade-exposed businesses. It'll also study economic analysis, things like prices of fuel at the pump, and will businesses go under, and will it have a job impact, things like that. We have data, but not that's been generated by an objective third-party entity at the state. And the third is around the economic opportunities around carbon sequestration, like the Warm Springs Tribe example. So there's that's going to happen, and that'll answer a lot of questions that some legislators who were just nervous wouldn't, they wouldn't just take the jump without that data. So we will be able to separate the wheat from the chaff by virtue of having all of this. So we'll have that information, and if you're opposed, be opposed. I mean, this is a democracy. You're allowed to oppose this legislation, but just say you're opposed. And we will have the data that some folks have been hiding behind. The other is there's a joint committee that's been created, and Speaker Kotek and President Courtney are going to co-chair that. And that's a big deal. That effectively means it's going to be heard in the House, it's going to be heard in the Senate. We don't need any Republican votes. We want Republican votes. This is something we would like everybody in the state to recognize, and certainly representing a business organization. I have lots of Republicans who are members of our alliance, and we feel it's not a partisan issue. But in terms of vote getting, we hope that by virtue of doing this work, we'll be ready to rock and roll in 19, and then we'll have done some of the work that 3-year rulemaking process would have needed, and we're hoping to be able to move that to a 2-year rulemaking process and still launch in 2021. So our big goal was don't lose ground. And I think the big opposition, we'll have opposition from fuel providers, the truckers and other folks who buy a lot of gas and diesel. And the utilities, I think, are going to come to the table and help us try to figure this out. I think the biggest opposition is going to be that the legislature next year is going to be looking at PERS and revenue reform, and those are big issues that are of deep concern to our legislature. And my counsel has been, we need to learn to do more than one thing at a time. Let us just come. And that was actually my argument going from 18. Do you really want us in here in 19 taking up air? So our hope is that we will get this passed quickly, and the legislature can spend the rest of their session focusing on those big issues.
Right. Do you have anything to add to that, Michelle?
Not specific to that. I think more broadly, just one of the things that I've seen with the federal administration stepping away from some of the climate commitments, I've really seen a lot of cities step forward. So I guess the silver lining there would be that the cities really have taken up the mantle and said, cities are where the action is. It's where most of the carbon emissions are coming from. It's where the greatest opportunities are, and cities collectively are really stepping forward. And a lot of cities that have not historically been doing this work are figuring out how to do it now because of that shift in the federal landscape. And so I think that there's tremendous opportunity in that, and we spend a lot of time and energy working with other cities and helping them figure it out. And so they don't have to recreate the wheel. They can see what we've done, what other cities like Portland have done, and adopt those things and pursue those things that make sense for their communities. And so it's really inspiring and exciting to see so many cities step forward now that really just weren't part of the landscape, 2 years ago.
I think that's a good summary of where we are and sets the scope for what we need to be doing in thinking ahead. Continue doing what we're doing, think about how we each individually can do something a little bit more, and make sure our legislators know what we think about this moving forward and how to get things done next year. So I'd like to thank each of our speakers for sharing their expertise and creativity. It's been really interesting. I learned a lot. And I would like to have all of us thank our speakers.